Lily, a young girl with a bright smile and a love for the simple joys of life, was out in her front yard, her tiny hands busy playing with her favorite toys. The world seemed to shrink for her as she focused on the little things, the small plastic figurines in her hand, the softness of the grass beneath her feet. She was different from the other children, yet in her heart she knew only joy. The sun was warm, casting soft shadows over the neat garden as Lily lost herself in the beauty of her surroundings. Her mother, always watching from the window, could feel the peace of the moment. There was a safety in it, a fleeting happiness that she clung to despite the challenges that came with having a disabled child. But peace, as fleeting as it was about to be shattered. Not far from the yard, a woman stood watching. At first, she appeared to be another one of the neighborhood's regulars, maybe just someone passing by. However, her gaze was different, a look that lingered longer than normal, scrutinizing. This woman, Karen, was the sort of person who held herself with a certain quiet superiority. She lived in the same community, abiding by the unwritten laws of the neighborhood, laws that didn't always welcome those who didn't fit the mold. Karen's presence, though calm at first, was charged with an undercurrent of tension. She was one of those people who believe the rules should never be questioned, and she didn't take kindly to anyone who dared challenge them, no matter how insignificant the offense might seem. As Lily's mother watched from inside, a knot tightened in her chest. She could sense it. Something was wrong. It wasn't the first time they'd had run-ins with neighbors who didn't quite understand Lily's condition, her playful nature, and her need for the freedom that all children deserved. But this felt different. There was something about the way Karen was standing there, so still and watching so intently. Lily, oblivious to the tension, continued her game, her innocent laughter echoing through the yard. She didn't notice Karen's growing frustration, nor the way the woman's posture began to shift, tightening, coiling like a spring about to snap. The neighborhood, usually so quiet, suddenly felt charged, as if it was holding its breath. And in that quiet, Lily's mother's protective instincts kicked in. She watched every movement, every glance, her heart racing as she imagined the worst. But nothing could have prepared her for what came next. There was no warning, no time to react, just a sudden, sharp confrontation. The words came quickly, coldly, and with an edge that made Lily's mother's blood run cold. Karen had crossed the line, and Lily's innocence became her vulnerability. The joy in Lily's heart would soon collide with the harsh reality of a world that wasn't always kind, especially to those who didn't fit the norm. And just like that, the idyllic moment was over, replaced by something darker, something far more sinister than Lily's mother had ever expected. The tension in the air was palpable as Karen stepped closer, her tone sharp, her words cutting. It wasn't just about the HOA rules anymore. It was about something much more personal, something that would change the course of their lives forever. The stakes had just been raised, and there was no turning back. The conflict began to unfold slowly, like a quiet storm gathering strength. At first, it seemed like a simple misunderstanding, just another neighbor voicing concerns about a rule being broken, as was often the case in this tightly knit community. But as Karen's sharp words sliced through the air, it was clear that this was more than a mere disagreement. This was personal. "Your daughter," Karen began, her voice cool, but filled with an unmistakable undertone of irritation, "has no business playing in front of my house. This is private property, and the HOA has clear rules about what's acceptable here." The words were not merely a request. They were a demand, spoken with the kind of certainty that made it feel like Lily's presence in her own yard was a crime. Her tone was steady, but the disdain was evident in her eyes. Lily's mother, still inside the house, stood frozen by the window, unable to move at first. The protective instincts that always burned in her chest were now on high alert. Lily's mother knew the rules of the HOA, rules that were meant to keep the neighborhood pristine and orderly, but the way Karen was speaking felt wrong. It wasn't about the rules anymore. It was about control. It was about making someone feel small, making someone feel like they didn't belong. Lily, with her disability, had always stood out in the crowd, And though her mother loved her unconditionally, there were times when she wished the world would just leave her daughter to be herself without judgment. But Karen was a reminder that the world could be unforgiving. Lily's mother couldn't stay quiet any longer. With a deep breath, she stepped outside to confront Karen. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached, but she tried to remain calm, not wanting to escalate things further. "She's not breaking any rules," Lily's mother said softly but firmly, her voice steady. "She's just a child playing in her own yard. There's no harm in that." But Karen wasn't listening. Her eyes flickered with anger as she stepped closer, her words sharp. "Rules are rules. If you can't follow them, maybe you should move somewhere else where people like you and your daughter aren't such an inconvenience." The slight was subtle, but it stung. It wasn't just about property lines or the HOA anymore. It was about making Lily feel like she didn't have a place here, that she didn't have the same rights as anyone else. The world seemed to close in on Lily's mother as she realized that the confrontation was no longer just about a broken rule, it was about her daughter's worth in the eyes of others. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a growing sense of injustice. She wasn't going to let Karen diminish Lily's right to be herself, to be free, even if it meant standing alone. "You don't get to decide who belongs here," she said, her voice gaining strength. "This is our home, and my daughter belongs here just as much as anyone else." Karen's response was cold and calculating, but the underlying venom was undeniable. "We don't need people like her around, causing trouble. She doesn't belong here, and the rules are clear. If you won't control her, I will." It was a direct threat, but it was veiled in the guise of authority, and that made it all the more chilling. The air between them thickened, the tension rising with every word. Karen had crossed a line, and Lily's mother knew it. She could feel it in her bones. This wasn't going to end here. Lily, oblivious to the growing tension, continued playing in the yard, her innocent laughter filling the air. The sound of her joy, so pure and free, contrasted sharply with the bitterness that simmered between the two women. It was almost as if the world around them had stopped, waiting to see how this would unfold. Would it be just another dispute? Would Karen get her way and push Lily's mother to back down? Or would something far more dangerous happen? Lily's mother turned to her daughter, trying to maintain her calm. "Sweetheart, go inside for a moment," she called, her voice trembling just slightly. Lily stopped playing, looking up with her wide, trusting eyes, not fully understanding what was happening. Her mother's heart broke just a little more as she watched her daughter slowly walk inside, unaware of the storm brewing outside. Karen took a step closer, her posture rigid, almost predatory. She wasn't done. "You'll regret not listening to me," she said, her voice low and menacing. It wasn't just about enforcing HOA rules anymore. It had become something darker, something more personal. It was about control. It was about power. And Lily's mother realized that this wasn't a battle she could win by merely talking. She needed to protect her daughter, but how? Karen's threats loomed over them, and Lily's mother knew that if she didn't stand up now, if she didn't make it clear that her family wasn't going anywhere, things could escalate in ways they couldn't imagine. As Karen continued her tirade, Lily's mother felt a surge of anger, something deeper than just defending her daughter's right to play in her own yard. It was a raw, primal urge to protect, to fight back against a world that tried to make her feel ashamed of who her daughter was. She wasn't just fighting for her property, she was fighting for Lily's dignity, for her right to exist in a world that wasn't always kind to the vulnerable. The battle wasn't just against Karen. It was against every person who had ever made them feel less than. And she wasn't about to back down now. This was only the beginning. The conflict between them had only just begun to unfold, and the road ahead was going to be far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But one thing was certain, she was ready to fight no matter the cost. The tension had been building for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was only a few minutes. The air around Lily's mother had thickened with every word Karen spat, each one more venomous than the last. She tried to steady herself, to breathe, but the weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. She had done everything to protect her daughter from the world, from the cruelty that existed just beneath the surface, but here she was, standing face to face with it. The kindness she had shown to her neighbors, the understanding she had tried to extend, had done nothing to shield them from the deep-rooted prejudices that festered in places like this. Karen's voice was sharp, but there was something colder behind it now, something darker. She wasn't just enforcing HOA rules anymore. She was making Lily's mother feel small, unwelcome, and unsafe in her own home. Karen's words cut deep. "I'm giving you a chance to leave quietly. If you don't, I'll take matters into my own hands." The threat hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lily's mother tried to stay calm, to avoid the confrontation from spiraling out of control, but the rage bubbling inside her made it hard to think clearly. She was protecting her daughter, yes, but this wasn't just about defending her right to play in the front yard anymore. It was about standing up to someone who wanted to destroy her peace, her family's well-being, and most of all, her daughter's place in the world. "I won't let you do this," Lily's mother said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I've had enough of your cruelty." Karen's eyes flashed, and in that moment, everything seemed to stop. There was no more discussion, no more words. The anger that had been building inside Karen erupted like a volcano, and without any further provocation, she lunged forward. The speed and force of her movements were shocking. In one swift motion, she grabbed Lily by the arm and slammed her head against the wall with a sickening thud. The world seemed to shift around Lily's mother. For a moment, there was only silence, deafening, suffocating silence. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her daughter's body had been violently thrust against the cold, hard surface of the wall, and the pain that shot through Lily's fragile frame was almost unbearable to witness. Her mind raced, but her body couldn't react quickly enough. Time seemed to freeze as her daughter crumpled to the ground, dazed and disoriented. Lily's mother was frozen, not from fear, but from the utter disbelief of what had just occurred. She couldn't believe the level of violence she had just witnessed. This wasn't a simple disagreement anymore. This was an assault. Karen, the woman who had stood there just moments ago with her righteous fury, had just become a monster in Lily's mother's eyes. "Get up," Karen shouted, her voice harsh, like the command of someone who had completely lost control. "You're nothing but trouble." Lily's mother's legs finally moved, as if breaking through a wall of ice. She rushed to her daughter's side, her hands trembling as she cradled Lily's head in her lap, checking for any sign of injury. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and panic was starting to take root. Was her daughter hurt? Was she okay? "Lily, can you hear me, baby?" Lily's mother whispered frantically, her voice breaking. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open slowly, and she winced at the pain, but there was no sign of serious injury. Still, the shock on her face, confusion, fear, was all too clear. She didn't understand why this was happening. She had never been taught that people could be so cruel, especially when she was just being herself, playing in her own yard. But Lily's mother wasn't going to let this slide. Not now. Not ever. This was no longer a matter of rules or property boundaries. This was about her daughter, her safety, and her right to be treated with respect. The moment Karen had laid hands on Lily, everything had changed. There's no going back now. You just hurt my daughter," Lily's mother said, her voice rising in disbelief. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, one filled with shock and fury. Her protective instincts flared, and she stood, her body trembling with both the weight of the moment and the anger that was slowly turning into determination. "I'm not going to let you get away with this." Karen smirked, as if the whole thing were some twisted game. "You'll do nothing. No one will believe you over me." Her words dripped with contempt, and it was clear that she thought she had the upper hand. But Lily's mother wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The moment hung in the air, thick with tension. Lily's mother had never been someone who liked confrontation, who enjoyed drama. But this was different. This was her daughter. And Lily's mother would do anything to protect her, even if it meant standing up to the darkest side of human nature. With one last glance at Lily, who was now sitting up with her head resting against her mother's shoulder, Lily's mother made her decision. It was time to act, time to fight back. She turned to Karen, her voice shaking with righteous anger, but firm and unwavering. You've made a grave mistake, and I won't let you harm my daughter again. The course had been set. The story wasn't over. The fight for justice was only beginning, and the road ahead would be filled with more obstacles than she could possibly imagine. But Lily's mother had just taken the first step. The battle for her daughter's safety, her dignity, and her place in the world had begun, and she was determined to win it no matter the cost. The silence that followed the violent confrontation was suffocating. The world felt unreal, as if everything around Lily's mother had suddenly gone hazy, distorted by the shock of what had just happened. Her heart hammered in her chest as she knelt beside her daughter, her hands trembling as she gently cupped Lily's face, checking for signs of injury. The thud of Lily's head slamming against the wall echoed in her mind, replaying over and over in the horrifying silence. Lily, still dazed, looked up at her mother, confusion clouding her gentle face. Her little body was visibly shaken, her breath uneven. But there was no visible blood, no deep cuts, and for that, Lily's mother was thankful. Still, the emotional toll this incident would take on her daughter would last far longer than any bruise. Are you okay, baby? Lily's mother whispered softly, her voice strained but steady. Lily blinked slowly, the events of the past few moments clearly still processing in her mind. The terror in her eyes slowly faded, replaced by a hesitant, innocent smile, as though trying to reassure her mother that she was fine, despite the weight of what had just happened. But Lily's mother couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed forever. The world outside, the seemingly calm neighborhood, had just revealed a darker, more dangerous side, a side that had always been there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to show itself. Lily's world had been shattered in an instant, and her mother wasn't sure if she could ever make it right again. Let's get you inside, Lily's mother said, her voice cracking as she helped her daughter to her feet. The shock still clung to her, making every step feel like it was happening in slow motion. They walked to the door, the weight of the situation sinking in with every step. Inside the house, Lily's mother helped her settle onto the couch. She turned away for a moment, her hands running through her hair, trying to calm herself down. She could feel the anger rising in her chest again, the anger that had been smoldering ever since Karen's first rude remark, now igniting into a full-blown blaze. How could anyone do this to a child? To her child? To Lily, who had never done anything to deserve such cruelty? Lily's mother picked up her phone, fingers trembling as she searched for the number of their lawyer. She had to do something. Karen couldn't just get away with this. She had violated not just the rules of the neighborhood, but something far more sacred, the safety of a child. The anger inside her grew stronger, mingled with the desperate need to protect her daughter from the horrors of the world that seemed to be closing in. But even as she dialed the phone, her mind kept drifting back to that moment. The moment Karen had shoved her daughter's head into the wall. How could anyone be so cruel? How could someone who was supposed to be a neighbor, a member of the same community, inflict such harm? The thought gnawed at her, a pit of dread in her stomach. This wasn't just a dispute about property lines or HOA rules. This was about something far more sinister, the desire to control, to humiliate, to tear down those who didn't fit the mold. The lawyer's office picked up, and Lily's mother forced herself to focus. "I need help," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "My daughter was hurt. The neighbor, Karen, she attacked her. I need to know what to do next." The words spilled out in a rush, too fast, but they carried the weight of the anger and fear that had been building ever since the assault. "I'm so sorry to hear that," the lawyer said, his voice calm and steady. "You did the right thing by calling. We'll help you get justice. I'll need all the details, take pictures of any injuries, and we'll need to discuss the best way to move forward." Lily's mother nodded, her eyes still focused on her daughter. "I will. I'm not letting her get away with this." She hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The path ahead was unclear, filled with obstacles and uncertainty. She wasn't sure what the legal process would entail, but one thing was certain: Karen wouldn't go unpunished. The emotional toll this incident had taken on Lily was immeasurable, but Lily's mother wasn't going to let it define her daughter's life. She would fight for her, for their family, and for justice. As the minutes stretched on, Lily's mother looked at her daughter, who had curled up on the couch, her tiny hand clutching the hem of her mother's shirt. Despite everything, Lily still trusted her mother, still looked to her for comfort and safety. It was a reminder that no matter what Karen had done, she would not win. She would not tear apart the bond between mother and daughter. Lily's mother wiped her tears away, a quiet strength building within her. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. She would do whatever it took to protect her daughter, to ensure that Karen would never have the power to harm them again. The battle for their peace, for their dignity, had only just begun, and Lily's mother was ready to fight with everything she had. The days following the assault passed in a blur. Lily's mother found herself immersed in a whirlwind of emotions: anger, fear, but also a burning determination to see justice done. Every day, as she watched her daughter slowly recover, both physically and emotionally, the weight of what had happened hung heavily over her. Lily's innocence, her vulnerability, had been shattered in a way that no child should ever experience. But Lily's mother wasn't going to let the trauma define them. She knew that they needed to fight, not just for her daughter's right to feel safe, but for every other child and family in that neighborhood who had ever been made to feel less than. The first step in the fight for justice was meeting with their lawyer, a calm, experienced man named Robert Jenkins. His office was quiet, organized, everything in its place, much like his approach to legal matters. Lily's mother could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her as she sat in front of him, the room seemingly growing smaller. She had already given him the details over the phone, but now, as she sat across from him, it felt real. This was no longer a vague hope for justice. It was a battle that would require everything she had. "We'll start by gathering evidence," Robert said, his voice steady but reassuring. "You'll need to document everything: the injury, the emotional distress, everything. We'll also want to reach out to any potential witnesses, including neighbors who may have seen what happened. If Karen has a history of harassment or violating HOA rules, we'll use that to strengthen our case." Lily's mother nodded, taking in every word. But the truth of it all weighed heavily on her. Karen had assaulted her daughter, but she also knew this wasn't just about the assault anymore. It was about power, Karen's desperate need to control, to impose her will on others. It wasn't about enforcing rules anymore. It was about the kind of person Karen was: a person who saw themselves as above others, someone who believed they could dictate who belonged and who didn't. And for Lily's mother, that was something that had to be stopped. Robert continued, "We'll also need to discuss the possibility of a civil suit. While criminal charges could take time, a civil case would allow us to seek damages for what your daughter has endured, both physically and emotionally." The mention of damages was jarring. Lily's mother had never considered suing anyone before, but as Robert laid out the details of the case, she realized that this wasn't just about holding Karen accountable. It was about taking a stand, about making sure that no one could get away with treating others the way Karen had treated them. "We can do this," Robert said, as if sensing the weight of her thoughts. "It won't be easy, but with the right evidence and the right strategy, we can make sure that justice is served." As Lily's mother left the lawyer's office, she felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. The path ahead would be long, and the emotional toll it would take on her family was something she couldn't fully anticipate. But the thought of Lily's pain, her confusion, kept her moving forward. She couldn't and wouldn't let this stand. Back at home, things were quieter than usual. Lily had spent much of the week inside, recovering physically and emotionally from the trauma. Her mother had tried to keep her distracted: games, books, even simple conversations that they used to have about their day-to-day life. But there were times when Lily would look out the window, her brow furrowed as if she was trying to understand something she couldn't quite grasp. She'd never known a world where people could hurt each other like this, where kindness wasn't always returned. "I'm scared, Mommy," Lily had said one night, her voice so soft it nearly broke her mother's heart. "What if she does it again?" The words hit Lily's mother like a ton of bricks. Her little girl, who had always been full of hope, had now seen the darker side of the world. It was a reality no child should ever have to face. But her mother knew, in that moment, that it wasn't just about protecting Lily from physical harm. It was about restoring her faith in people, in kindness, in the world itself. "We're going to make sure she never hurts anyone again," Lily's mother promised, her voice filled with a fierce determination. "We're going to fight for you, and we're going to win." The days that followed were filled with meetings, paperwork, and constant preparation for what was to come. The lawyer's team began to collect evidence, including statements from neighbors who had witnessed the altercation or had heard about it. Some had seen Karen's aggression firsthand, while others had heard the rumors that had spread throughout the neighborhood after the incident. It became clear that this wasn't the first time Karen had crossed the line with others, but it had always been overlooked or dismissed. But now, with Lily's mother standing firm, it was different. This wasn't just about a dispute over property anymore. This was about holding Karen accountable for her actions and showing that no one, no matter how powerful they believe themselves to be, was above the law. Lily's mother felt a quiet strength building inside her. It wasn't just for Lily anymore. It was for herself, for every parent who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice, for every child who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. And it was for every person who had ever suffered at the hands of someone who thought they could get away with cruelty. The legal battle would be long. It would test their strength, their patience, and their resolve. But as Lily's mother sat beside her daughter, holding her close, she knew that this fight was more than just about winning a case. It was about standing up for what was right and teaching Lily through her own actions that even in the face of cruelty, there is always hope for justice. The weeks stretched on, filled with court hearings, legal consultations, and moments of uncertainty. The path ahead had seemed daunting at times, and Lily's mother had felt the crushing weight of the battle they were facing. But with every passing day, her resolve grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for justice for her daughter anymore. She was fighting for every parent who had ever faced a bully in a position of power. She was fighting for every child whose innocence had been stolen. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a fight to reclaim her daughter's dignity and sense of safety, and to ensure that Karen would never again have the opportunity to hurt anyone else. The trial day arrived. It was a cold, gray morning, the kind that felt heavy with the weight of what was to come. Lily's mother stood before the courthouse, her heart racing, but there was a certain calmness in her as well. She had already fought the hardest part, the part where she had to find the courage to speak up, to stand up to someone who had tried to crush her and her daughter. Now, it was time to let the law do its part. Lily, still a little shaken from the whole ordeal, had stayed home with her grandmother for the day. She couldn't bear to watch the trial, not yet. It was still too fresh in her mind, the images of Karen's cruelty too vivid, but Lily's mother knew that this was something she had to do for both of them. She couldn't let Karen's actions go unpunished. She couldn't let her daughter grow up in a world where such cruelty was allowed to go unchecked. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. The courtroom was filled with the low murmur of voices, the shuffle of papers, and the distant sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. As Lily's mother took the stand, she could feel every eye in the room on her. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had done this 1,000 times in her mind, but this was real. This was her chance to speak her truth, to make sure the world knew what had happened, and that it would never happen again. "I'm here today because my daughter was hurt," Lily's mother began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She was attacked in her own front yard, a place that should have been safe for her. She was simply playing a child doing nothing wrong, and she was violently shoved by Karen, the woman who claims to uphold the rules of this neighborhood. Her voice broke for just a moment, and she paused, collecting herself. The pain of reliving the incident was still raw, but she knew she had to keep going. For Lily, for herself, for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. This isn't just about a broken rule, she continued, her voice growing stronger. This is about cruelty. This is about a woman who believed she could control others, who thought that her power over people's lives gave her the right to treat them however she wanted. I'm here because I'm not going to let that kind of behavior go unpunished. Not in my community, not in my home, not to my daughter. Lily's mother's testimony was powerful, but it wasn't just her words that resonated in the courtroom, it was the truth she spoke. The pain in her voice, the vulnerability, the undeniable love she had for her daughter were all present in the room, weaving a story that no one could ignore. The evidence was clear. Witnesses had come forward, each one corroborating Lily's mother's account of the events. Karen's behavior was not just cruel, it was malicious, calculated, and unfounded. Karen's defense, as expected, was one of denial. She painted herself as the victim, claiming that she had been forced into a corner by Lily's disruptive behavior. But it was too late. The truth had already been laid bare. Lily's mother had done what was necessary. She had taken a stand for her daughter, for her family, and for herself. The judge's ruling came swiftly, though it felt like an eternity. When the gavel finally came down, there was a collective exhale in the room. Karen was found guilty of assault and harassment. The case was a victory, not just for Lily's mother, but for anyone who had ever been made to feel small, for anyone who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. The justice system had done its part, but it was Lily's mother's bravery that had carried them to this point. As Lily's mother left the courtroom, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The fight wasn't over. It never really would be, not fully. But in that moment, she knew they had won. Karen had been held accountable, and the community had been reminded that cruelty and power-mongering would not be tolerated. But more importantly, Lily's mother had proven to herself and to her daughter that there was strength in standing up for what's right. When Lily's mother returned home, she found her daughter waiting for her, a soft smile on her face, though still a trace of sadness in her eyes. Lily's mother knelt down beside her and pulled her into a tight hug. She knew that things wouldn't instantly go back to the way they were. Healing took time, but they had taken the first step. They had shown Lily that standing up to cruelty was not just possible, it was necessary. "We did it, baby," Lily's mother whispered, holding her daughter close. "We won." Lily's eyes brightened, the spark of hope that had been dimmed for so long flickering back to life. "We did, Mommy," she whispered back, her voice barely audible but full of strength. "We won." And as Lily's mother held her daughter, the world outside didn't seem so cruel anymore. There was hope now. There was strength. And above all, there was justice. If this story moved you, and you believe in standing up against injustice, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out on more powerful real-life stories. Join us on HOA Denied Access for more incredible journeys of resilience, courage, and justice. Stay tuned for the next chapter, and let's continue to fight for what's right together.